Hello, everyone. Oh, I don't need these because we're not gonna listen to anything. Well, actually, we are kind of. Let me hold that thought there for a second. Happy week, everyone. There's one video I forgot to queue up, and it's on TikTok. Um, and it's funny because um there's going to be um just it has to do with China and the tariffs and all this type of thing, and so it's just I'm finding it and I'm vamping while I find it. But it's yeah, this whole trade war thing has already gone to hell in a handbasket. Here's the video. Um we'll watch it in a second. But we'll get into it, but this whole trade war has gone down in a handbasket. Emphasis on handbasket, and the handbasket was made in China. Um, so today has been absolutely just interesting. A lot of moving parts and things going on today. I want to first say thank you to all the new people who have been subscribing to the newsletter and all this type of thing. It's been great. Welcome. I know that we don't seem to have a rushing crowd this week in terms of people watching, but we had such a lovely group last week. Well, you can't win them every week. Anyway, today's interview is really interesting. It's with Jack Cameron. He has been writing on men, manhood, masculinity, and men and boys since 1983. And he and I have a very fascinating conversation about the state of modern men. So for those of you who might follow me for the men masculinity content that I sometimes do or are interested in that sort of thing, definitely check out today's interview. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on the Cameron Journal tomorrow. Um, And we just had a ton of new content today. Easter's coming up, so we have some Easter content this week. Just lots of stuff happening on the Cameron Journal. So if you are not, if you're not subscribed to emails, you should be. So head on over to CameronJoel.com. If you want to start doing post-live Discord hangouts, other special events, fun stuff like that, check out Cameron Journal Plus. It's only count them, $5. You can subscribe at CameronJournal.com/subscribe, and it's a great way to support me and support the journal. I've done the Cameron Journal in all of its forms for 10 years, and always for free, never a paywall, which is unusual for people on the left. Most left things have a paywall and all this sort of thing. And I'm not planning on going hard paywall anytime soon, but there's definitely some stuff I want to start reserving for subscribers and trying to build up a paying subscriber base. So definitely check out that. If you're on, YouTube, wherever, if you're watching this on Facebook, please give the page a like. If you're on Twitch, make sure to follow. On YouTube, please like and subscribe. So wherever platform you might be on, please definitely like and subscribe there. If you want to take me with you in your pocket, make sure to subscribe to the Cameron Journal podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, because that's where I do all the interviews. I don't do the news hour there because we do it live here. There's dead air at the beginning for the live and blah 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 blah. So I don't post this to my audio only platforms, but all the other interviews are there. So if you want to keep up with that, that'd be fantastic. So with that being out of the way, I had a fantastic weekend. Very relaxing. I got a lot of stuff done, but it was also relaxing. I still have tax days tomorrow, in case you've forgotten. And this year I am late. I usually have my taxes done by now, but this year I didn't. I was waiting on some paperwork that finally came in, and I was just behind. And I think you remember, last week I had the website disaster, which took up most of my Monday. And the week before that I had a computer studio meltdown. So I've lost kind of the last couple weeks to all of this, and so So I finally got everything mobilized, and like millions of Americans, I will be filing my taxes right at the deadline tomorrow on the 15th. I'm usually better than this. I every year I usually plot out the first weekend in April to do taxes, and that was the weekend my studio came out. And this has just had cascading consequences ever since then, and we're only just now finally catching up. So it's good. But I had a great call with a friend this weekend, which was really good. Did some other stuff, hung out with people. So it was just a nice quality, relaxing weekend. I've been thinking a lot about me and myself in the future and this show and all this type of thing and what that all looks like. And I think I'm at the stage of my life where I really want things to be good and I want to focus on thriving. And that's hard to do in these difficult times. We have some tough headlines this week. We're going to dive into it. But at a personal level, I want to focus on thriving. I want things to be good. I want to get a little bit more into book writing, although I did last week complete all the final edits for America's Lost Generation, which is off to final proofing and going to be in production here soon. So sometimes I have to give myself a break. I was telling someone today, I said, no, I was writing a monthly Substack thing I have to do for my book publisher, and I was saying, and I was writing to be kind of like, I have to give myself grace about not working on other projects or having a lot of output of books because I just finally finished a book. Like I've been working with one through this process for a while. And so I have to give myself some grace that not everything is happening all at once. And I think that's kind of one of the big takeaways that I've learned, because my birthday is coming up in 12 days. So I'm turning 37. And I'm kind of having a proto midlife crisis, but which I've kind of talked about. But I really realized that you can't do it all at once, and you can't have it all at once, and you really have to plot out like your time, your space, your energy, all this type of thing to kind of move through things in a different, more ordered way. And I think in much of my life thus far, I've always kind of had a tremendous sense of urgency and a tremendous sense of everything has to happen today, right now, sort of thing. And that isn't necessarily the case. And so it's important to be able to take some time to move through stuff and move through projects and get different projects ready to go and all this sort of thing. And so it's yeah, it's good. It's a lot, but it's good. So I'm just very, excited to move into, how would I say it? I'm excited to move into a different mode of life where I'm not chasing everything around with my head cut off, and I'm just moving through things in a very, well-paced, methodical way that makes sense to me, my energy, so I'm not burnt out all the time. I've been fighting burnout off and on for almost 3 years running because I was doing my graduate program in the middle of COVID, got COVID late in the pandemic in 2022, and had health issues and long COVID and all this type of thing. And so I was burnt out from grad school. I was burnt out from COVID. I did a cross-country move in there, had a breakup, all this sort of thing. And so it's really right now about just kind of reconstituting the energies and going from there. And that means maybe not moving as quickly as I would always like to. So that's just a little bit about me and my life. I'm trying to do more of that stuff because people like it. And it kind of, you get to know me, you want to stick around. It's kind of a thing. But you didn't just come here for me to speak philosophically about my life and my situations and all this type of thing. You came for the news. And I want to start right off with the new Chinese TikTok trend of revealing who's been making everyday products, high-end luxury goods, and more and more. And it's all going down on TikTok. I saved last night the perfect video. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of videos about makeup, handbags, things like that, that they're like, if you don't buy this with the label, we'll sell it to you, for $2, $5, $10 sort of thing. But the funny video I'm going to show you has nothing to do with purses and handbags. It has everything to do with laundry pods. So let's take a look. Here we go. Yeah, let's give this a little listen to.
You just found a direct factory of laundry pods. My family worked in cleaning industry for more than 30 years. I'm the second generation. We need the agents to distribute our beautiful products in their own country. For small quantity, we can ship worldwide from one carton. If you are interested, please follow me along, send me a message, get free sample. Congratulations.
And so how they're how they're doing this is they are making the products that would ordinarily be, repackaged as All or Tide or Gain or whatever have you. And if you register as a distributor, they will send you free samples, which are untariffed. And he's selling, there's another video he goes into this, he's selling these for $1 a pound. You don't even buy them per. You buy them by weight. And it's just, this whole thing has become, I don't think I have another video of these. Oh yeah, I have this one. Somebody's watching me. This has become a whole thing of Chinese sellers kind of tearing the veil back and showing, we've been making all the stuff, we've been doing all of this, and European and American companies have been putting a label on it. Well, screw them and just buy from us directly. And it's just, there's thousands of these videos. Everything. NARS, Loewe, everything. Like, I pay for a compact of powder that I use for the show, and that, like, the NARS is $30 at Sephora. $5 here. That's what the force are trying. And they're literally inviting people, come to Guangzhou. China has a new visa out now. 280 hours of shopping. You can fly to China, get a shopping visa. You have 280 hours, which is about a week, to go shopping. You can go to all these places. And they're marketing. And you can go and buy all of the products at deep discounts. It's insane. It's so insane. And the reason why I highlight it is because Trump's trade war is heating up. And and China's, right now he exempted tariff. We're going to get into what tariffs got exempted over the weekend and everything. We'll get more into the state of the trade war. But right now, you have these huge tariff barriers, and China's response is, well, we'll just sell to your people directly on TikTok, and there's no TikTok deal happening right now. And TikTok was supposed to have been banned on April 5th. Trump gave it a 75-day extension. And China's not even having that conversation right now because of the trade war. So this is all again gone to hell and a handbasket. So let's put a pin in that. We're gonna come back to Trump tariffs because I have a great story from a right-wing outlet about that I think is interesting. It'll cause some good conversation. But before that, I want to dive into a story that should be bigger today over the weekend. There was an arson attack at the Pennsylvania governor's mansion. It says here, this man was charged with setting fire to the residence, forcing Governor Josh Shapiro and his family to flee. Investigators said they found beer bottles with gasoline inside the house. It says here, Pennsylvania state authorities have arrested and charged a Harrisburg man they said set fire to the governor's mansion while Governor Josh Shapiro and his family slept, forcing them to evacuate early Sunday before the blaze severely damaged part of the building. The man, identified as Cody Balmer, 38, jumped a fence and managed to evade state troopers after he broke into the building, the authorities said. He fled the scene and was arrested after turning himself into the police on Sunday afternoon, officials said at a news conference. Mr. Balmer was charged with attempted murder, arson, and terrorism, the Dauphin County District Attorney's Office said early Monday. During a news briefing on Sunday outside the fire-scarred mansion, Governor Shapiro, a Democrat who gained national prominence last year when he was on the short list of possible running mates for Kamala Harris, said that the FBI was assisting in the investigation. The smell of smoke lingered in the air as he spoke, with the blackened, broken windows where the arsonist had struck visible behind him. Mr. Shapiro became emotional as he described his family's ordeal, recalling the moment a state trooper had banged on his door shortly after 2 a.m., waking him, his wife, and his children, and rushing them to safety. The attack, he said, had been targeted. Quote, "Last night we experienced an attack, not just on our family, but on the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania," Mr. Shapiro said. "I want you all to know that your prayers lift us up, and in this moment of darkness we are choosing to see light." The authorities gave details about the attack in an affidavit filed with the charges against Mr. Balmer early on Monday. Mr. Balmer illegally entered the grounds of the governor's residence early Sunday and broke a window with a hammer and threw an object inside that started a fire, according to the district attorney's office. He then entered the building and started at least one more fire. Investigators recovered 2 broken glass Heineken beer bottles that had been filled with gasoline. When Pennsylvania state troopers interviewed Mr. Balmer later on Sunday, he admitted to starting the fires. When state troopers asked him what he would have done if Mr. Shapiro had found him, Mr. Balmer said he would have beaten the governor with his hammer, the affidavit said. The authorities did not release any information about a motive for the attack. The Pennsylvania State Police found a jacket in Mr. Balmer's nearby home that matched the one seen on surveillance video footage of the attack, the district attorney's office said. During the news briefing, Mr. Shapiro said he'd spoken with Kash Patel, the FBI director. Quote, "He promised all the resources of the federal government," unquote, Mr. Shapiro said, adding that he thanked Mr. Patel and the FBI and the president for their support. And then it goes on to some details and some pretty stunning pictures. There's some more of the fire damage. I had seen other pictures that were also really, really terrible. So, this happened on Sunday, obviously, and it should be a bigger story. It should have been the story today, and no one's really talking about it, so I wanted to highlight it. Obviously, for the people that are talking about it on Twitter, everyone wants to know, was this guy a Trump supporter or a crazy Democrat? Rumors are flying, but we don't know, and until we know more, I'm not going to reserve judgment. But either way, I don't care who you are. We shouldn't go around lighting the governor on fire. The only part of this that makes me kind of chuckle is in the 19th century, this was the type of shit that happened in American politics all the time. It really did. There was a senator from Kentucky had his house taken apart and thrown in a river at one point. There were all sorts. I mean, if people were unhappy with someone in government, they just like went to the property and, seized them, seized the house, seized the cow, all this sort of thing. And so in that way, it's kind of a return to what I would say, a return to form, of American politics. But, obviously setting fire to the house with the wife and children inside is quite shocking, very dangerous, and people could have been killed. So we want to avoid such things in future. Although I fear that we're going to end up with increasing amounts of this sort of thing moving forward, and more, people doing rather dangerous things. So the other kind of big story, this broke this afternoon. Hello. Thank you for coming. This broke this afternoon. It says Harvard says it will not comply. I should put my glasses on so I can actually read this stuff. Harvard says it will not comply with the Trump administration's demands. Federal officials said Harvard must enact, quote, merit-based reform, unquote, in hiring and admissions and report international students who broke rules, among other steps. Harvard called the demands unlawful. It says here. Harvard University said on Monday that it had rejected policy changes requested by the Trump administration, becoming the first university to directly refuse to comply with its demands and setting up a showdown between the federal government and the nation's wealthiest university. Other universities have pushed back against the administration's interference in higher education, but Harvard's response, which called the Trump administration's demands illegal, marked a major shift in tone for the nation's most influential school, which has been criticized in recent weeks for capitulating to Trump administration pressure. A letter the Trump administration sent to Harvard on Friday demanded that the university reduce the power of students and faculty members of the university's affairs, report foreign students who commit conduct violations immediately to federal authorities, and bring in an outside party to ensure that each academic department is, quote, viewpoint diverse, unquote, among other steps. The administration did not define what it meant by viewpoint diversity, but it is generally referred to seeking a range of political views, including conservative perspectives. Quote, no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and what areas of study they inquiry they can pursue, unquote, said Alan Garber, Harvard's president, in a statement to the university on Monday. Since taking office in January, the Trump administration has aggressively targeted universities, saying it's investigating dozens of schools as it moves to eradicate diversity efforts and what it says is rampant anti-Semitism on campus. Officials have suspended hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds for research at universities across the country. The administration has taken a particular interest in a short list of the nation's most prominent schools. Officials have discussed toppling a high-profile university as part of their campaign to remake higher education. They took aim first at Columbia University, then at other members of the Ivy League, including Harvard. Harvard, for its part, has been under intense pressure from its own students and faculty to be more forceful in resisting the Trump administration's encroachment on the university and on higher education more broadly. The Trump administration said in March it was examining about $256 million in federal contracts for Harvard, and an additional $8.7 billion in what it described as, quote, multi-year grant commitments. The announcement went on to suggest that Harvard had not done enough to curb anti-Semitism on campus. At this time, it was vague about what the university could do to satisfy its administration concerns. Last month, more than 800 faculty members at Harvard signed a letter urging the university to, quote, mount a coordinated opposition to these anti-democratic attacks, unquote. The university appeared to take a step in that direction on Monday. In his letter rejecting the administration's demands, Dr. Garber suggested that Harvard had little alternative. Quote, the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights, he wrote. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government, unquote. The government's letter to Harvard on Friday demanded an extraordinary set of changes that would have reshaped the university and ceded an unprecedented degree of control over Harvard's operations to the federal government. The changes would have violated principles that are held dear on college campuses, including academic freedom. Some of the actions that the Trump administration demanded of Harvard were conducting plagiarism checks on all current and prospective faculty members, sharing all its hiring data with the Trump administration, and subjecting itself to audits of its hiring while, quote, reforms are being implemented, unquote, at least through 2028, providing all admissions data to the federal government, including information on both rejected and admitted applicants sorted by race, national origin, grade point average, and performance on standardized tests, immediately shutting down any programming related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, overhauling academic programs that the Trump administration says, quote, have egregious records in anti-Semitism, unquote, including placing certain departments and programs under an external audit. The list includes the Divinity School, the Graduate School of Education, the School of Public Health, and the Medical School, among many others. The demand suggests that the federal government wanted to intrude on processes that universities prefer to have control over, like how they admit their incoming classes. It also touched on issues that conservative activists have used as cudgels against academics. Plagiarism accusations, for example, are part of the reasons that Harvard's former president, Claudine Gay, was forced to resign. Quote, Harvard has in recent years failed to live up to both the intellectual and civil rights conditions that justify federal investment, unquote, the Trump administration letter said. Last month, after the Trump administration stripped $400 million in federal funds from Columbia University, Columbia agreed to major concessions demanded by the federal government. It agreed to place its Middle Eastern Studies Department under different oversight and to create a new security force of 36, quote, special officers, unquote, empowered to arrest and remove people from campus. The demands on Harvard were different and much more expansive, touching on many aspects of the university's basic operations. In Harvard's response on Monday, it said it had already made major changes over the last 15 months to improve its campus climate and counter anti-Semitism, including disciplining students who violate university policies, devoting resources to programs that promote ideological diversity, and improving security. Harvard said it was unfortunate that the administration had ignored the university's efforts and moved instead to infringe on the school's freedom in unlawful ways. And then it goes on to commentary from faculty and all this sort of thing. I'm not surprised. This is very similar to what Georgetown did. I actually did a thread on Twitter about that. I think there are aspects of this that are probably, some things I think maybe possibly have some merit. Other things don't. I don't want the federal government doing any of it. Because I hate to be a slippery slope person, but when you start allowing the federal government into conducting plagiarism checks and sharing hiring data and admissions data and deciding what program you can do, you don't have freedom of speech or a free society anymore. You certainly don't have a free university. And people will argue and say, well, then they shouldn't be taking any federal dollars, all this sort of thing. And it's like, maybe that's true. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's true. I think if they're conducting a study on the efficacy of aspirin in the medical school, whether you have a DEI program shouldn't matter. The Trump administration thinks it mattered. They're in office. That's fine. Don't have to agree with it. But I think, as a broad principle rule, I don't necessarily want government sort of doing these things. I certainly don't want the government hiring organizations to external audits on certain parts of the university, all because they take some federal dollars. Might this mean that Harvard can't take federal money anymore? Yeah, perhaps. But here's the downside of that. The downside is that research is going to go unfunded. Certain faculty will be left without jobs. And you're going to end up with a much less robust research and development foundation, because where the really good stuff happens is at big institutions like this who have a lot of money and can fund this stuff and have the faculty and expertise and can pull in people from all over the world to do it. Now, we might want to take that course of action. There are consequences to it. But I think, in any sort of regime, when you have academic institutions and a government, I don't care what the government is, getting too close together, you have problems. And in this country, we have never had those things merged together. When we've had grant programs in the past, the requirements have been, going along with civil rights, not allowing segregation, things like this, trying to sort of ideologically remold and remake academia has been, I would say, a project of the conservative movement since at least the mid-1970s, and now they finally have someone in power who might actually do it. It's definitely going to be a tough time in academia these days. It's going to be a tough time in the Ivies these days, because they're under the spotlight. And the Trump administration is not going to let this go. Certainly, they're going to keep dogging on this, and Trump will make a big deal about pulling their funding, sort of thing, because they were non-compliant. It is all going to go down in court though, because here down at the end of where I didn't read, it is there's definitely going to be a lawsuit situation going. So it's but it is, I think, these places are resilient when they start to push back, and I think Trump's pushed them too far. Again, agree with it or disagree with it. I don't agree with it. I don't want government anywhere near this sort of thing, but that's where we are. And again, it's one of those stories that should be talked about more today. I don't talk about politicians by name that often. Today's been weird because we've talked about Trump and Shapiro, and we're talking about Michelle Obama. I don't tend to talk about politicians as people very much, but I thought this was an interesting little story. There has been a rumor running around that Michelle Obama is divorcing Barack Obama. And it says here, the former First Lady said on a podcast, the people, quote, couldn't even fathom that I was making a choice for myself, that they had to assume my husband and I are divorcing, unquote. It says here, it's not quite an old adage, but at this point it has long been true. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, reminded people of this in a recent podcast interview. In rare public comments about her personal life, she discussed swirling rumors that she and her husband, former President Barack Obama, were headed for divorce, and tacitly explained why she didn't attend President Trump's inauguration. The gossip about a possible split was fueled by Mrs. Obama's absence from two major public events in January that her husband attended, former President Jimmy Carter's funeral and President Trump's inauguration. While her absence at Mr. Carter's funeral was attributed to a scheduling conflict, a statement about her absence at the inauguration did not include an explanation. Mrs. Obama now has offered at least a partial answer. She is making decisions for herself. Quote, I choose to do what's best for me, not what I had to do, she said on this week's episode of Work in Progress, a podcast hosted by Sophia Bush, referencing a real big example of something on her calendar that she skipped. People, quote, couldn't even fathom that I was making a choice for myself, that they had to assume that my husband and I are divorcing, unquote, she said. Quote, this couldn't be a grown woman just making a set of decisions for herself, right? But that's what society does to us. That was as close as Mrs. Obama got to directly addressing the rumors of marital discord, and she did not mention Mr. Trump by name on the podcast. In the past, she has expressed dislike for the president, who promoted the lie that her husband was not a U.S. citizen. Now is the time for me to start asking myself these hard questions of who do I truly want to be every day, Mrs. Obama said, and that changes. On the roughly hour-long episode, Mrs. Obama did not waste many words on the rumors, nor did she go into detail. Instead, she emphasized the importance of making her own decisions, especially now that she no longer occupies the White House and her 2 daughters are adults. I learned that I can really only control me, Mrs. Obama said. I thought that was interesting. I didn't go listen to the whole podcast episode because I didn't care that much. But I just thought I would kind of mention that there was a whole Twitter thing over the weekend about, oh yeah, this, that means they are getting a divorce and all this sort of thing. And I think it really has to do, as someone pointed out, with scheduling. I think she just wants to decide what she's going to do and what she's not going to do. And we know she doesn't like politics. She was not a big fan of being first lady. We know that she was always not necessarily super thrilled that Barack wanted to be in politics and his political career rose so fast and all this sort of thing. And so I think it's a matter of, you're not going to see this woman anywhere she doesn't want to be. Divorce or not, and a lot of this rope-a-dope political stuff that she has, quite frankly, very little taste and care for, you're not going to see her very much. She is going to be having brunch with others, crosstown. Honestly, I love that for her, to be honest. I love that for her because, would that we all had that level of option and levity in our lives. But I thought it was an interesting sort of anecdote, because like I said, I don't tend to cover politicians as people very often, but today we have an exception. Governor Shapiro's getting burned down. Michelle Obama's controlling her own schedule. It's a crazy day. Now, out of the light, well, actually, this is the last kind of light story, then we'll get into some heavier stuff. So, what are we looking at here, Cameron? I'll tell you. This is the, what is this, a 5-year chart? It's a 5-year chart. A 5-year chart of the dating app Bumble. Now, for those of you who haven't dated in a long time, you might not know what Bumble is. Let me tell you. Bumble is a dating app where roles are reversed. On Bumble, it's both men and women, but the women have to approach the men. That's the central conceit. And judging on usership and earnings and all this type of thing, they've gone from a nice healthy, that's about $60, $65. And as the years have gone by, through the pandemic and in the years afterwards, it's slowly gone down to a princely $3.95. Oh, it says here it was at $71.51, down 94.7% over the past 5 years. And so it is, just kind of been on steady, long-tail decline. Now, why does this matter? The top is kind of interesting. Culture is the invisible infrastructure. Once it fractures, no amount of strategy, headcount, or cash can save you. What does that mean? The culture around dating has changed. Women don't necessarily want to be approached, or men don't want to wait to be approached. And if that's your central conceit of your app, that's how you lose 94% of your share value over 5 years. And it's kind of interesting because there's lots of, I would say, products and things that make sense in one cultural moment but don't the next. And I'll give you an old school example. Pet rocks. In the late 60s, I shit you not, they took rocks, the kind you find outside, painted them, little flowers, whatever have you, put them in a box, I'm not even lying, put them in a box, and sold them in stores. And it was sort of this, companion. It was a pet rock, have it, with you in your bag, on the go, all this sort of thing. And it came in a little box, and I don't think it had a name or anything. You could name it, all this sort of thing. And at the time, it was probably someone's great, brilliant idea. Someone made a lot of money. Millions were sold. And then now it's sort of a joke. I mean, it's kind of, when we talk about, products that are worthless but are being sold, we kind of use it as a reference sort of thing. Especially when I'm talking business or advertising or whatever have you. Like, if you don't think you can sell what you do, pet rock. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but they worked hard on the production, the manufacturing, working with retailers. I mean, there was millions of dollars and thousands of man hours that went into selling pet rocks. But then the culture changed, and then, you don't see those anymore now, do you? And I thought it was an interesting thing because the general consensus of this was, people aren't using dating apps anymore, or people aren't dating anymore. Someone posted this chart that was like, oh, U.S. dating app user growth. This line was interesting and said, I couldn't help but put some thoughts on this because most people still do not understand how things become irrelevant and why, especially emotional experience like dating apps. And I thought it was sort of an interesting sort of thing, and also kind of the cultural idea of, should women do the approaching because that's somehow safer? Is it, it was kind of more popular maybe with millennials years ago, and as Gen Z has become the bulk of the dating cohort, this is not for them, ergo it's on its way out. All sorts of different theories kind of bumping around, but I think I was kind of shocked because I hadn't heard anyone mention Bumble in a while. Now, admittedly, I've been in and out of a relationship for 5 years, so I haven't, been talking with a lot of other people about these things, but I hadn't heard anyone mention Bumble for a while. Lots about Hinge, still a few things about Tinder, all those things. I hadn't heard anything about Bumble in a while. So when I saw this, I was kind of like, oh, that's why I haven't heard about Bumble in a while. It's not going well over there at Bumble. Yeah, I feel like that sort of, women have to send the first message so they don't get, unwanted dick pics and all this type of thing, was a nice idea a decade ago in 2015. But I mean, honestly, if you're Bumble, you've had a nice run. They'll probably get sold. So at this price, someone will come in and buy up all the shares and take it over and probably close it or merge it with something else or whatever have you. Or, pivot the brand to some other type of dating or whatever have you. So it's, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes into this whole idea that somehow modern dating is just broken, apps aren't helping, but it still might be the best way to meet people unless you're like meeting through friends or whatever have you. But even that seems awkward and risky, and people just don't want to risk putting themselves out there, so because they don't want to get shamed on the internet. There's all this sort of stuff going around about dating, and so this whole thing just kind of, in my mind, really encapsulated the problem. And in my next book, America's Lost Generation, I have a whole bit about dating and what dating in the internet has been like. And yeah, this is an interesting dynamic, a lot of interesting ideas here. But I don't want to spend too much time there. We have bigger fish to fry. So speaking of ICE, immigration, and university students bouncing off the Harvard story from a couple minutes ago, it says here, this is totally insane. Before ICE arrested Ramisa Ozturk for writing an op-ed, the State Department said it found no evidence that she was anti-Semitic or supported Hamas. The government arrested, jailed, and is deporting someone for writing an opinion some officials dislike. Repulsive. And it goes into basically recounts the picture here. And then down here is the original story of Ramzaya Ozturk, a Turkish national and Tufts University graduate student, in some video of them getting arrested, sort of thing. And the idea is that, this person engaged in activities in support of Hamas. They need to be deported. But there's no evidence of it. And especially when you have the case of Mr. Garcia from Maryland, who was sent to the El Salvadoran prison. The Supreme Court ordered him to be returned, and the Trump administration basically said, yeah, we're not doing that. That's happening right now. In fact, do I have... No, I don't have that. That's a tariff story. Then, and I wrote about this in the newsletter on Saturday, and the Supreme Court was just kind of like, yeah, return him, and the Trump administration was like, no. Given that situation, and now this is the new, this is the new standard. And I think it's important to remember, one, first they came from me and I did nothing, or first they came from someone else and I did nothing. But the fact that, again, this sort of thing is happening at all, and this is posted by not a leftist organization. Reason Magazine is very libertarian, very center-right. And so the fact that they're complaining about this is quite telling. And obviously, there's a lot of people who don't, necessarily care about this. I do like this person. No one's reporting this as the Trump administration deporting a journalist. I believe this falls into that category. It's weird how they're just afraid of just one person with an opinion. There are some people who will love this one. Aw, not so nice when they choose on the other foot. Lawfare sucks, doesn't it? We'll leave that alone. Visas are privileged, not a right. They can remove it for literally any reason. That's not true. There's all sorts of laws and legal stuff about losing a visa. And so there's all this, there's obviously a lot of opinions about this, but the reality is when you get to the place in a government in a country where people are being arrested for whatever reason the government has decided, and you have people who express an opinion in a country that's supposed to have free speech, and they get, deported for that reason, sort of thing, that is, that's a very dark day, and it becomes a problem for everyone very quickly. Because here's the reality. The same infrastructure that's going after this person is the same structure that can go after any of the rest of us. A lot of people thought it was a little weird when, after the election, I did a whole thing on this show during this news hour saying, this job just got a lot more dangerous, but I'm going forward anyway. This is what I was talking about. This is why I say this job's got a lot more dangerous. I could say the wrong thing tonight, and it could be curtains for my whole life. Which is why you don't want government doing this. You want it decided in courts, very legal, lots of people involved, with an appeals process, all this type of thing. If you genuinely are here doing bad things and doing evil and promoting terrible things, there is a case to be made for having someone removed for agitating against the government or in support of a terrorist organization or whatever have you. Yes, okay, go to court, do some paperwork, get the job done, and out they go. Fine, great, whatever. But to just, by fiat sort of thing, no. It becomes very dangerous for anyone. Because, okay, today it's supporting Hamas. What could it be tomorrow? Today it's being anti-Semitic. And that term is very, very loose. I've said things that, from a certain perspective, might be considered anti-Semitic. I did it on this show last week. So, it's a slippery slope very quickly. And everyone's like, well, they're not a citizen. It doesn't matter. It doesn't take very long before it starts to expand beyond just, oh, it's a visa holder immigration issue. Oh, it's just that person over there. Again, first they came for the trade unionists, and I did not say anything because I was not a trade unionist. Go read that poem, because we're starting to live it. Right here. So, on the tariff front, we're going to close the tariffs, because we got 15 minutes left, so we'll dash through tariffs and we'll be done. Which is good, because I've had a long day. I went to bed very early last night. I woke up very early. I've been busy all day. And I'm ready to be done. And so, let's get through tariffs. So, the first thread I want to do is going to talk about how Trump lowered tariffs on certain electronic goods from China because of the economic realities. And it says here, so I'm guessing something like this happened. 1, Jeff Bezos called Trump and told him 70% of the stuff sold on Amazon will go up in price by 100% next week. Tim Cook called Trump and said iPhones are going up in price by 100% next week. Michael Dell called Trump and said all laptops and PCs will go up in price by 100% next week. White House realized the U.S. economy is about to implode. U.S. dollar is crashing, which is true. Bond yields are going off the chart, which is true. And inflation is about to skyrocket, also true. They went and rolled back the majority of Chinese tariffs over the weekend with tails between their legs. Every country can now see that the tariffs are a blank bluff with zero strategy. Every company is now 100% sure that moving production to the U.S. is a complete waste of time because the tariffs policy is completely unreliable and extremely volatile. A giant L being taken after implementing a policy that no one actually thought through. What was the actual point? No jobs have come back, no factories were built, trade imbalance remains exactly where it was, borrowing costs for the U.S. increased, and business relationships with the rest of the world got destroyed for no apparent reason. Okay, so that's a little hyperbolic towards the end. That's not entirely true. That's a little hyperbolic, but I like the point. It's the main problem with this whole, we'll just buy American. A lot of stuff doesn't exist here. And I've written about this 4 times in the last month. A lot of stuff ain't made here. Plastic injection molds, metal parts, all this type of thing. We don't do that stuff anymore. Textiles, we haven't had a textile industry in 40 years. All this sort of thing. So you can't just buy American. There's also no incentive to bring production back because you have labor costs are way too high. You don't have the supply chain or the expertise. I mean, even if you're talking something like clothing, it's not just sewing machines and people operating sewing machines. It's the fabric. It's the notions, elastic, buttons, zippers. It's all of that stuff. It's thread. It's fabric, all this sort of thing. And a lot of those things aren't made here either. So in order to have a textile industry, you have to be doing notions, you have to be doing fabric, which requires agricultural or synthetic inputs, and then you get clothes as an end product. This is, there's all these, and when you get into electronics, the supply chains are even more numerous of all the things required to make this stuff happen. And it's just not practicable. It's just not. A lot of these stuff are low margin, high input, and our cost of labor is too high. It'll never be competitive, all this type of thing. And the fact that there's already started to be tariff carve-outs for Amazon, Apple, computers, all this type of thing, and we now have the Chinese selling us Tide Pods on TikTok. This all was pointless. Now, there are some great companies who have decided to invest in new plants in America. Hyundai is investing. Other people are investing in building new facilities, all this type of thing. Right before I had started the news hour, I was reading a story about GM's new battery plant in Ohio, making batteries for EV cars. Mary Barra is doing great work over at General Motors. Sort of thing. I mean, it is not without that influence of it, and it's not without those good things happening for it. But the reality is that we live in a global economic village. The reality is supply chains stretch all over the world, and you don't undo that overnight without being very considerate about it. And I laugh because I've been talking about my Brains Magazine article where I talk about the Trump tariffs, and one of the comments I got back from David Beckmeyer, Outrage Overload, made me laugh because he said, your analysis of their policy is more cogent and thought through than their actual policies, and I think you're giving them too much credit. He's like, because you're actually a smart person who understands this stuff. I said, I get what their goal is, and I've said this. Scott Bessent has told us they want to lower 10-year treasury yields so they can refinance debt at a lower interest rate to reduce borrowing costs. They want to increase revenue through tariffs on a lot of things, and most importantly, they want to devalue the dollar so our exports are cheaper. That's what they want to do. They're getting one of those things. The dollar is devaluating against every major currency quickly. They're not getting their lower bond yields because not everyone, someone is selling a lot of treasuries somewhere in Europe, and people think it's China, but they don't know. They know that the sales are happening in Belgium and Luxembourg, but they don't know if it's inside China or not. So you actually have rising yields. So to some degree, what he's saying is that, we're going to have higher borrowing costs. We have pissed everyone off. No one wants to do business with us. And because this is all come and gone in a couple of weeks, no one had any incentive to build a new factory and bring back all of those jobs and all this type of thing. The reality, and this is something the Biden administration understood, is that industrial policy takes time. Under Biden, we created 250,000 new manufacturing jobs because they passed a law early in their term in 2021, and a lot of those factories were opening last year because it takes years. So if you want to get more industry and manufacturing going, you've got to work with companies, you've got to subsidize it, figure out where it makes sense, maybe put in the tariffs around those things to help those companies be competitive. over time, the only person I've seen who's made sense on this is an economist that they've hired who said, yeah, it should be maybe between 1 and 10% phased in over 3 years. Not 125% in a week. Or, but then lowered to 10% for everyone. I mean, half the tweets you read about the current tariff rates aren't accurate because they've already changed. Because everyone, Trump's trying to play chicken with the world, and declare the end of globalization, all this type of thing. I get where we're going with this. I get what he wants to do. Globalization has not been... If you are a working class person in the developed world, globalization has not been great for you. Your TV is cheaper, your electronics are cheaper, but your job opportunities are not great. Survey came out this weekend. 80% of Americans think we should be making more stuff in America, and a good 20% said they wanted to work in a factory, and that's 5 million people. That's 5 million people who would like to be in a factory on an assembly line doing something where things are actually made. Wonderful. Let's keep encouraging that. I'm not saying we shouldn't have an industrial policy. We certainly should. We're just going about it in the dumbest way possible. Put a pin in that, because we have this next story. So... the Gatestone Institute is international policy research. They're very conservative, and they're very pro the Trump plan. And so I want to kind of go through a couple of these things so you kind of understand what the thinking is on this, having just heard what I've said. So, let me take a drink real quick because my throat is dry. Here we go. Even the European Union, which initially threatened hell and high fire, is beginning to realize that if you're in a hole, you stop digging. Even China, which seems to have embarked on a game of chicken against the U.S., is almost certain to realize that it cannot afford a full-scale trade deal with the U.S. Trump is accused of protectionism, but here too, a measure of protection is conducive to economic development. Without protectionism, Victorian England would not have been able to build its industrial revolution and create a global empire. It is obvious that achieving parity in most, if not all, those domains is a realistic aspiration, and that in any trading relationship, one partner is at a disadvantage. Now in his second term, Trump intends to go further by addressing other problems inherent in the global system, including the vulnerability of supply chains and the danger inherent in strategic dependency on foreign sources of vital goods and services. Despite the great deal of sound and fury that it has generated, it is perhaps too early to assess the lasting impact of President Donald Trump's latest fireworks on tariffs. Some things, however, are certain. Contrary to assertions by talking heads on the small screen, we are not heading for a global trade war. True, the U.S. is the world's biggest economy and ranks second as a trading power, but its share of the world trade hovers around 12%, or under 10% of its GDP. The remaining 88% of the world traded by 192 nations won't be immediately affected. Moreover, almost half of U.S. foreign trade is with its two neighbors, Canada and Mexico, which had a tussle over tariffs with Trump in his first term, but managed to reach a deal and are poised to do the same this time. Apart from his blanket 10% tariff on all imports, higher tariffs have been suggested for some 60 countries, including 30 or so that account for 40% of U.S. foreign trade. By the time of this writing, several of those had indicated readiness to negotiate a compromise. Even the European Union, which initially threatened hell and high fire, is beginning to realize that if you're in a hole, you stop digging. The forthcoming G7 summit may prove an opportunity for that. Even China, which seems to have embarked on a game of chicken against the U.S., is almost certain to realize it cannot afford a full-scale trade deal with the U.S. Some pundits, like Columbia University's Professor Jeffrey Sachs, claim that tariffs suggested by Trump could lead to a recession. To back that claim, they cite the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930, which imposed a set of tariffs on U.S. imports. According to Sachs, that act caused the Great Depression. The erratic behavior of stock exchanges across the world in the past few days has raised the specter of another recession. I doubt that will happen, but even if it does, it would be the result of poor perception by financiers gripped by fear and greed. Factories around the world would continue to work and farms would not stop producing. The Washington Post goes further by comparing Trump to President William McKinley, implicitly designating the U.S. as an imperialist power. However, the paper forgets the key features of imperialism, none of which apply to the U.S. An imperialist power exports people, whereas the U.S., thanks to immigration, has been a net importer throughout its history. Trump is accused of protectionism, but here too a measure of protectionism conducive to economic development. We read that part already. Bismarck's Germany would not have become 19th century Europe's industrial powerhouse. Similarly, the Japanese Meiji miracle was prompted by protectionist policies. To be sure, too much protectionism can be deadly, as it discourages competition and innovation and rewards scientific and intellectual laziness. Like Trump, Adam Smith, the father of economics, is an academic discipline, was a fan of tariffs while holding up the free market as an ideal in which comparative advantages of all nations become operational. However, that ideal depends on that troublesome Latin phrase, ceteris paribus, other things being equal. In other words, the availability of raw materials, presence of competitively priced labor, proximity to markets, standards of scientific and technological development, legal and political stability, and regulations come into play. It is obvious that achieving parity in most, if not all, those domains isn't a realistic aspiration, and that in any trading partnership, one partner is at his advantage. That fact now applies to the U.S. and is highlighted by its huge balance of payments deficit, overall indebtedness, and high tariffs it has faced throughout the globalization saga. Trump tried to undo some of that disadvantage in his first term, and imposed tariffs that his successor Joe Biden, a champion of globalism, maintained. Now in his second term, Trump intends to go further by addressing other problems inherent in the global system. If the proposed scheme is really implemented, the U.S. is likely to correct other problems, including the loss of industrial memory in many sectors, the downgrading of large areas of the country caused by shipment of jobs overseas, and addiction to relatively cheap, low-quality consumer goods. An unintended consequence could be the reduction in the share of the U.S. dollar in trade transactions. Contrary to Trump's belief that the current dollar is king situation in world trade transactions is to the advantage of the U.S., a lowering of that profile could contribute to his other aspiration of sheltering the U.S. from some of the uncertainties of a global system that could run out of control. I thought that I like, not that I agree with them all the time, but I like the Gatestone Institute. I think they have something interesting to say. I recently subscribed to them, and I thought this was kind of an interesting way to look at the tariff thing from another angle, to look at it from another side, to look at it from a, okay, this could be good, why would that be? So I thought that was an interesting perspective and an important perspective shift for us all. It's always important to read widely, remember that news is a narrative, that's why they call it a story. And to keep a different perspective on everything. So it's been a raucous week in the news. I am tired. It's been a 12-hour day. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna let you all go. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Catch me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at Cameron Cowan, at Cameron Journal on TikTok. Clips of this come out all week long, and clips of the interview, today's interview with Jack Kammer, also will be out. So keep an eye out for those. And I will catch up with you all soon. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter. Comes out every Saturday, right directly to your inbox, with the best of the Cameron Journal all week long. And feel free to share with your friends. And I will see you all next Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern for the Cameron Journal Newshour. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.